Well, hello, welcome back from lunch. I'm glad to see so many people here. This is actually pretty inspiring. I've been here at MIT doing climate change related things, global change, global warming issues for close to 25 years. And it's wonderful to see people finally rallying behind the longer view, to think about what should we do as a campus to be a role model for the world, and how can we make our operations better? Yeah, I just think it's wonderful to see so many people enthused about this topic and just really rallying around the idea that we ourselves need to come up with the ideas. No one's going to make it happen for us, and these are serious questions. So I just want to commend you all for taking part. Also on that note, I know I don't have time to be up here today. I spend an entire day doing this stuff that isn't my regular job, and I know that most of you may feel that way too. So it's a nice personal sacrifice that you've made just to take a step in this direction. And as we've heard so many times, this is the mini step, the very beginning of a very, very long process. So you have to sort of gird yourself for the thought that we're not going to accomplish a huge amount today. It's a long road, and you need to have the wherewithal. So on that note, I am very pleased to have two, and actually a third, a very distinguished guest to share with us some of their knowledge. Bert is virtual. He's listening right now, and we could see him as well, and we will in a moment when his turn comes up. He's at Cornell. He will present what another campus has done in the sustainability realm as an example. But first, closer to home, Nathalie is going to tell us what her firm has found in assessing Cambridge's vulnerability and resilience and where the risks are. And then even closer to home, Jim will tell us a bit about what the campus could do.
I think I'm going to add complexity to what you studied or discussed today. You discussed sustainability, deferred maintenance, and now I'm going to talk about the change brought by climate and the stress it will put on our built environment. So I'm here to present what the City of Cambridge is doing, which is certainly of interest to MIT. And the City of Cambridge has the foresight to look at what will be the stress imposed by climate on its municipality or in its city, and to do that study, they're combining science, to which we are working with an expert advisory panel with faculty from Harvard, including faculty Professor Jacoby, I think, that presented this morning, Harvard, and also we're working with Columbia University and with IPCC, which is the scientist for climate change. What is the challenge for the City of Cambridge? It's basically that current design criteria based on the past are no longer relevant. And we need to make new approach to understand what will be the parameters of climate and how we should build our environment for it. And why the City of Cambridge is doing that and what will be the deliverable or the outcome of the project is to understand what would happen if the city would take no action, and also to identify the physical and social and economic asset that will be most at risk. So what we're doing basically is a stress test for the City of Cambridge, looking at what climate change could mean for the city. This is a three-step approach, which is basically the project framework, looking first at climate projection and scenario development, doing a risk and vulnerability assessment, and the next step, which would be in another phase to be started this summer, which would be what the city called a preparedness plan, but which is in fact an adaptation plan. The climate projection are being done looking at time horizon. So this is looking at what would happen in the 2030s and what will happen, which is considered as the near future, and what will happen in 2070, which would be a more distant. Looking also at emission scenarios, so this is where the scenario development is key, and this is the link with sustainability, which is a key point, because that's a key question asked to the city of Cambridge. If you're moving to vulnerability assessment, are you giving up on sustainability and mitigation? And the answer is no. I mean, because what is made as a decision for sustainability and mitigation will inform the scenario development. So we've been looking at high greenhouse gas emission scenario and low greenhouse gas emission scenario in terms of how they would impact the climate. So one aspect is obviously the sea level rise, which is most discussed on the news and within this area. We are working with MassDOT, who is undertaking a very advanced model of sea level rise and storm surge, which is called Adcirc. And the results are not public yet, and this is to be issued within the next month. But one of the key findings, which was kind of surprising to us, is that most likely the Charles River Dam won't be overtopped by 2030, which means that there won't be flooding. There's unlikely to be flooding from the Charles River due to a hurricane, okay? That will happen sometimes between the 2050, 2070, and this is where, I mean, the consequence will have to be looked at. Those results are not totally compiled and final yet, but that's gonna be what we're gonna be looking at this spring when these will be reported. But that means that for our team and for the city of Cambridge, which was another aspect of the climate parameters, which were change in precipitation, which we thought would not be a priority, became the key factor in what could cause major flooding within Cambridge between now and the 2030. So this is looking at climate projection. You know, when you hear, for example, that the intensity of precipitation will be increasing in the near future. This is where, and there will be more rain in more focused event. What does it mean? And that has been one of the challenge of our study, is to link science projection with engineering planning and what it means for construction. So basically, we've been looking at how what is the 10-year storm is being planned, what we call a 10-year storm, which has a 10% probability of event, which is happening today. Will be the 10-year storm of the 2070 will be like the 25-year storm. So this is where those more extreme events will happen more often. We linked the modeling of those precipitation with the pipe infrastructure and the riverine flooding to show which area will be most at risk of flooding. And what it means for MIT is basically that some area will be at risk for a kind of more extent of flooding and a more critical depth of flooding as well. And we did a similar study for heat as well, and this is where we look at where there's going to be a significant increase in heat, and where the baseline today is where you have about 11 days about 11 days about 90 degree on a time base. On a yearly base, it's going to be 3 times that by 2030 and 6 times that by 2060. And then again, we look at heat island and what it means in terms of specific stress to specific areas of the city, and so those are area above 90 degree, and this is what it looks like in the 2030, and it's quite critical in the 2070. And again, what does it mean for a campus like MIT is extreme heat events are likely to increase in frequency, intensity, and duration, and precipitation-driven flooding is likely to increase in frequency as well. And again, that sea level rise will be less of an impact in the near future. Then what it means for the vulnerability and risk assessment, what we did is we identified critical asset and resource for what is the built environment and what is the social environment, looking at public health and vulnerable population as well as economic impact. And this is where we looked at the climate projection. We look at on a GIS based the critical asset. We overlay one on top of the other. This is for us, it was really important to translate in concrete term what flooding meant in in terms of the scientific projection to the reality of the terrain. So this is where GIS has been a very useful tool. And then we use a standard kind of vulnerability assessment, which looking at exposure, the contact to the hazard, the vulnerability, which is the function of the asset, of the sensitivity of that asset to its adaptive capacity. So, and then the risk, which is basically a function of probability of occurrence and the consequence of failure. Basically, what we did is we had kind of a spreadsheet for each of these assets, and I'll take the MIT power plant, for example, that is it's exposed to flooding according to our map. What we look is at sensitivity, because, for example, we assume that if critical equipment is exposed to even 6 inches of flooding, it will be damaged. Because we don't know MIT that well, we assume there were no adaptive capacity, for example, pumps, or they would be flood shutting door that would protect that. Consequently, it's a high risk because of the impact on MIT and what would be the consequence, you know. So, and that is a high risk because it's the 10-year event. So we did that kind of detailed analysis because we believe in metrics like MIT for all of the system within the city. We also extended that to the economic analysis, looking at what would happen if real estate was damaged by flooding. But again, one thing we found out is the disruption of economic activity would be much greater than property damage. So for example, if there's flooding within the Kendall Square area, or there's flooding within research and development industry, what would be the loss in terms of people not being able to access their job, those buildings being shut down for a day, for 2 days, what will be the implication? We also look at public health because it's a key aspect. Northeast city are much less well equipped than southern city to cope with heat. Their impact on people with chronic disease and with vulnerable population. So that's one aspect we're gonna look at. And also what are the implications for indoor quality if you have repeated flooding, for example, and you have mold within your building. So then the challenge for us is to compile all of these data and understand where should be the high priority area within the city. And basically, this is where, and this is work in progress. We are in the process of compiling all this information, but this is looking at vulnerable population, the economic impact, and all the critical services. And the key findings are basically that within the near future, there should be a focus on the heat increase, what will be the demand on the building, and what will be the impact on the population, and also the possibility of disruption of economic activity, as well as there will be major impact on most infrastructure caused by flooding and some heat as well. So my apologies, this is a lot to push through for 15 minutes. There will be a public meeting on March 17 at MIT as well. And the information will be available online also as we are submitting those reports. But in a nutshell, this is kind of a summary of a very extensive study, and we're working with the sustainability group as well. Thank you.
Okay, well, terrific, and thanks very much for this invitation, Julie and team, and also to follow this presentation that Nathalie has given for us, and continue really along some of the same themes of resilience. And this was my charge, was to talk about resilience on campus and what might be called resilient campus design for those portions of the campus that are being kind of taken up in fresh new ways, but also for some of the types of renewal questions that Tony raised earlier. So I'm going to start out with an image of some campuses under different situations. On the left-hand side, you might recognize Stanford and the 1906 earthquake. Upper middle, probably less familiar, but this is the library at Colorado State University in 1996, the flooding that they had. And Colorado State University has one of the very best hydrology and water resources management programs in the country. Really one of the top, and yet their library proved vulnerable, the basement portion of it. Cal State University Northridge for the Northridge earthquake in the 90s there. This was the type of perhaps flood stormwater event that Nathalie was referring to. I think it was the 2010 event, not a major in terms of damage, but perhaps an indicator and wake up for us. And then the Hurricane Sandy, that is an image in the bottom central of the NYU Medical Research Laboratories, and many of their experiments involving animal experimentation wiped out. So it's sobering to see what's possible when, with things one doesn't expect, and with shorter types of lead times than climate change, so that one has to think, even as we've had to think in the past couple of weeks, about the types of unusual events that might confront one. And it's surprising to me on reflection that our campus has to shut down with all the kind of emphasis on edX, MITx, MOOCs, and so on, that we can't just have classrooms running with the kinds of snowstorms that we've had recently. That should be something of closures of the past. They cost an enormous amount in terms of disruption of academic schedules. Anybody who ran Monday seminars this semester has got a mess on their hands. And well, we all had messes on our hands. Every time one thinks about global climate change, I find in my own experience, it's when my roof starts leaking, my basement starts flooding, pipes are bursting in my own home, and I have to kind of balance the emphasis on long-term sorts of change with resilience to unexpected events and surprises. How is resilience used as a concept here in the MIT community? What sorts of ways do we think about this concept? And to do this, I did a search of the tech. And the most frequent reference is really to the perseverance of students, to the types of support that the university community provides that kind of helps to enable resilience amongst its community, and in the face of both regular stress, but then also real traumas. And we've got some listed here. And then secondarily, the types of systems or infrastructure resilience that occur periodically with the cyber attacks, network resilience. Our steam distribution system was cited once, along with electrical grid outages that affect what happens on campus. Resilience is also used in ordinary language with respect to these events, as it is with respect to the economics, especially after the 2008 shock to the economy. And then finally, sports team performance. Were they resilient or not in coping with being behind or defeated at one occasion? So this is the ordinary language, and what's surprising about it is how we don't have much discussion in our news on campus of climate change resilience or of disaster resilience. Doesn't come up as part of the ordinary language on campus, and the way that it does in some of our courses and the research that we're doing. And so it's worthwhile, I think, to kind of just distinguish several concepts of resilience and how they contribute to what might be envisioned for campus. The most common, widespread, would be more what I would call mechanical ideas of resilience, the ability to return to a prior state or some acceptable equilibrium. Sometimes it's, in the engineering systems work, it's time of restoration of the system to a prior state. The ecosystem resilience field that Buzz Hollings and others really pioneered a generation ago stressed and introduced concepts of adaptation, both ecosystemic and evolutionary adaptation, but also behavioral types of adaptation within ecological systems, and then the whole modes of interaction between human and ecological systems that field of conservation ecology has contributed. The whole field of resilience work on in positive psychology and social psychology. How do societies cope with, anticipate, prepare for, are they pre-adapted or not to different types of stresses, shocks, traumas, is an enormous field of research in disaster psychology and disaster sociology. Thanks. And then finally in the design field, which is our own in the Department of Architecture, School of Architecture and Planning. Here we don't want to return to a prior system at all. In fact, we're not even satisfied with adaptation to a shock. We want it better. We want to be much better in how one builds back or builds in anticipation of potential risks. I won't go through an elaboration of this, only to say that we offer courses in disaster resilient design and the types of contributions that design can make to mitigating risk, retrofitting systems, large-scale retrofits we've looked at in other parts of the world, reconstruction after disaster, resettlement of vulnerable populations. That's going to be a topic in our coastal cities for sure. Commemorative design, and we have an example of this with the Sean Collier Memorial coming up right now on our own campus. And really, the comprehensive approach that one would urge integrates all of the above, of these different approaches or aspects of resilient design. We've done this in Japan, in India, and Pakistan. This is a short course in Pakistan that we run, and where complex emergencies that are really compounded by civil strife and war and refugee populations really make these assessments extremely difficult. We've done collaboration with the National Academy's Disasters Roundtable, but we haven't done anything with respect to, at least in my sphere, with disaster resilience on campus or climate change resilience on campus. And fortunately, it's really great to hear about the work that the city is doing and the Office of Sustainability and so many other colleagues here on the vulnerability and preparedness of MIT for different types of scenarios of sea level rise, flooding, and heat stress. What we have done is look at some of the more I'll call them resilience to more anticipated types of events, and some of them in a very natural pattern of stormwater series, as well as unusual types of stormwater events, and come up with some proposals on this slide here of a watershed entrepreneurship approach in the East Campus design context that is so exciting right now on campus. And this is an example of someone who's trying to couple this engineering systems and ecological systems approach. Another student who had a really fabulous mid-rise buildings with complex programming of multiple residential and mixed commercial types of use buildings, suggested that in East Campus one could have a ground plane that was committed to a restorative environment, take some of the edge off the psychological and social stress of everyday life, as well as the kinds of shocks one can experience. I'd like to stress the importance of looking at other centers, and Berkeley is a great example of collaboration between the city of Berkeley and the university in retrofitting city and campus pretty comprehensively. Mary Camario was the architecture faculty member who helped lead that really impressive body of work that they did to undertake a very large-scale retrofit of the university. And I knew colleagues there that used to say, I really don't like to talk with Mary. You know, every time I do, I get worried. And so I prefer, but fortunately Mary kept talking and talked to the right people in the administration and the city, and they really have a much safer campus now. If you ask where are the centers of research for all hazards preparedness, for resilience of a comprehensive nature, it'd be really fun to do a sample. We don't have time because I just hit my 2-minute mark or so. But the sample, would it yield in your mind these universities? Carnegie Mellon, perhaps, for risk perception and communication, but some of the top, Texas A&M, University of Colorado Boulder, particularly for the climate resilience type of work, as well as hazards, Delaware for disasters, Penn for insurance and risk, University of South Carolina, the best all-around hazards program in the country, in my view. And how many people look to University of South Carolina as a model for what we should be thinking of and also learning from? Really want to urge that type of work, as well as attention to what Homeland Security is doing with its university collaboration and campus resilient pilot projects. They have sponsored programs of investment and co-investment to help make campuses specifically more resilient to the types of climate change. The other great resources on campus, and when one takes what that Homeland Security program has called a whole campus approach to resilience, the core resources are in already on campus in the safety and security facilities, campus planning, MIT medical, environmental health, risk management, procurement, student affairs, campus housing, Office of Sustainability, not last or least, to say that the kind of knowledge of resilience amongst these organizations is what those of us in the research and teaching fields need to draw upon, collaborate with, in order to really advance both our fields of work and the practice here on campus. Can't happen otherwise. Last slide then is to, or rather a couple of questions for you, and oh, rats. Okay, so that image that you had on the end blocked out two questions that I thought would be useful for discussion. And the last two questions that I'll just read them out then is to ask, how can and I'm going to specifically stress the outdoor campus, the campus landscape, its environment outside the buildings become leading research and teaching laboratories for resilient planning and design. I feel like we've made a lot of progress on building science, building technology, but as an environmental system, the campus could be a great laboratory, and that opportunity, I think, beckons enormously. And the second question would be, how can resilience become not a risk management question, not necessarily solely a constraint on design, to be sure one is in compliance with risk standards of design, but rather a visionary principle for campus planning and design, where the resilience that one has is something you're especially proud of, especially inspired by, and especially want to share as something that can ensure the well-being in all respects of the campus community, its creatures, and its larger science and legacy long into the future. Those are the thoughts on resilience in campus planning and design. Really grateful again to be included in this, and to looking forward to the prospects for working with all the different groups on campus that are A, already doing this, and B, have a sense of what might happen. Thanks very much.
Well, thanks for inviting me. I'm very sorry that I wasn't there to participate all day. Flight was canceled. I was hoping to participate for several reasons. One, just to contribute to your efforts, but two, to learn more about what you're doing. We're all kind of, each university has our own path. It's time for Cornell to sort of reset our approach to sustainability on campus and throughout our academic mission. We've kind of, over the last 6 to 8 years, developed governance and an approach and processes that need to be reset. We're getting a new president. Our president, David Skorton, stepping down on June 30th, going to be the Secretary of the Smithsonian Institution. We're getting a new president. We'll get a new provost this summer. We have a new director of campus sustainability. And all our governance structures are really time to reset. So I'm really anxious to hear how you make out today, and I'll follow up with Julie. This is kind of the flip side to adaptation and resilience. I'm going to talk mostly about mitigation. It's our story here at Cornell, and it'll be different in every university, I think. I just hope that all our stories, when we look back from sometime in the future, we do the right things as soon as we can do them for mitigation of carbon emissions and to prevent global climate change. So I'm going to tell our story, and it begins back in, with this picture, which was taken in 2001. I was on actually vacation. It was a quiet spring. I was on vacation in a barrier island off the coast of South Carolina. Not much happening, no internet connectivity. I don't think I had a cell phone. Little did I know it, but there was a takeover of our administrative building by the students. And you can see here, I don't know if you can see my pointer, Kyoto now. Students took over the administration building, basically occupied it, wasn't the word that was used back then, and demanded sustainability and demanded Cornell comply with the Kyoto Protocols. We came back to this headline. I'm just going to pause for a second and let you read this. So this happened again. I came back to this, and all of a sudden, Cornell had committed to the Kyoto Protocol reductions because, as you may recall, President Clinton had signed the Kyoto Protocol in his term in the late 1990s, and the United States Senate and George Bush and the House failed to ratify the protocol. So Cornell signed up to do the Kyoto Protocols, and that was sort of the beginning of our goal setting in that kind of messy conflict resolution way. So we signed up for that, and then in 2007, David Skorton committed to the campus to be carbon neutral by the year 2050. There was a big push then by the American College and University President's Climate Commitment, actually founded by Second Nature and others, to have campuses sign up. I think there's almost 700 campuses signed up for this. So we were one of the founding institutions that signed up for that. And then 2014 came, and a faculty senate resolution called for two things. One is a divestment from fossil fuels by our endowment, and two was to accelerate climate neutrality to 2035. So our president, in consultation with the trustees, said no to divestment from fossil fuels, but yes to accelerated carbon neutrality action to get us off of fossil fuels. At that point, I said, whoa, that's only 20 years from now, and that's daunting because I know how long it's going to take to completely transform an infrastructure that's based on very cheap fossil fuels. So we came and said, we in facilities cannot be doing this alone. Needs broad campus ownership, specifically by academic leaders. We've engaged our colleges through a Think Big Red. That's we're the Big Red. Think Big, Live Green program. We have a new budget model, and actually I just came in today. I'm going to show you the headline here. I don't know if you can see that, but it's provost to slash budgets across Cornell University. To address 55 million annual deficit, colleges will see cuts totaling 27 million. It's part of this new budget model where everything is decentralized. So there's quite a lot of consternation about budgets right now. It's kind of a hard time to take a new initiative on that might cost money, that will cost money. But we're asking for academic leadership in this effort. And the only way we're going to make this, I think, is if there is a tie-in to the academic mission. We had a working group of faculty and staff work on this problem of acceleration. Here are some of the recommendations. I won't go through them each, but typically we're looking for stronger academic partnerships and aggressive investment in energy conservation and in addition to adding a price of carbon to utility bills to colleges and units and adding price of carbon to business travel, which several universities are considering and many corporations actually do. That's not happening right now based on that headline I just showed you, but it's under study. So I'd like to go through our strategy right now. we're trying to minimize growth. We're not going to eliminate it. We're going to reduce energy demand where we can, and then make up the supply, decarbonize our energy supply, both electricity and heat. About 50% of our energy goes into electricity and about 50% into heat. And then what we can't reduce, we'll have to offset. This is a little chart of where we've been. In 2008, that was our first greenhouse gas inventory submitted to the President's climate commitment. The blue bar is the on-site fossil fuel combustion, which was coal. Cornell had been primarily coal-fired since our founding in 1865. So we heated the campus with coal-fired steam through a steam distribution system, a legacy system, and mostly procured our electricity from the grid of the New York State electric grid, and that's the carbon footprint from that. We also included in our inventory commuting by employees to work and students, daily commuting, and air travel for work purposes. Now, we were able to reduce this by 2012 by 33%, and mainly because we went off coal, and instead of separately procuring electricity, we went to very efficient natural gas-fired combined heat and power. So we make all the electricity in-house, and we make all our steam in-house, and it's more efficient. So pretty big win there. And I believe MIT's system is much like ours is now. MIT didn't have the opportunity to go off coal, so not the big win that we had here. We've bumped up a little in 2014, as you can see. That's primarily cold weather related because of more heating degree days. On the demand side, what we're looking at now is continuing to keep our building energy demand from rising. This chart shows from the year 2000 to 2014, the campus has grown to over 14 million square feet, about a 20% increase, and the buildings are listed there. And most of them are high-tech energy hogs, basically. The labs we build are 150,000 BTUs per square foot per year because of so much ventilation to keep the labs series safe. But throughout this growth, we've been able to keep our steam use and demand flat, as you see here in the red bars, and the left-hand axis is the million BTUs in a year. Or we've kept our electric use flat and our chilled water, and that's through very aggressive energy conservation initiatives in existing buildings and doing the best we can with new buildings to make them, to reduce their energy use intensity. Here's a little cartoon of our campus, and I want to walk through our supply side plans now. So this is our campus. It's 14 million square feet, 15 million square feet, 250 major buildings, roughly the size of MIT, I think maybe a little bigger. We have a microgrid, so we can disconnect from the grid and make all our own electricity. That's optional island. Typically, we're connected. We have a district steam system and a district chilled water system. We're hooked up to the grid. We're 3 miles out to an interstate natural gas pipeline and the regional electric grid. Just as an aside here, we're in a natural gas constrained area, differently than you think of it in the Northeast. You can't get enough gas into natural gas in the winter months into New England. Well, we can't get it out. We're in part of the Marcellus Shale region, even though high intensity fracking for natural gas has been banned in New York State. We're so close to the gas fields of Pennsylvania that we have very cheap natural gas, and because it's actually cheaper than the national standard. So we take natural gas and we take the grid. We also have a hydro plant, 1 megawatt hydro plant, which serves the whole campus as a 30 megawatt load. This hydro plant was built in 1904. We're continuing to renew that with turbine rebuilds and control rebuilds. In 2000, we started up lake source cooling to cool the campus. it's a pretty innovative project. Since then, the City of Toronto has followed us, and we go 250 feet deep to where it's always cold in the deep waters of Cayuga Lake. And so we bypass the refrigerant system, compressors. We've dropped our summer load peak by, it would typically be about 45 or 50 megawatts if we had to run conventional chillers. But with this system, which is a sustainable supply system, we're about 30 megawatts, quite a dramatic reduction. Now, looking forward, what are we going to do to get off natural gas if we are continuing to drive to a climate-neutral campus? Well, one idea is solar to replace the brown grid. We've started up one 2-megawatt solar project, and I'll talk about that on another slide. We're also contracted for wind. We hope to get a local wind farm built by others where we would take all their output, enabling them to get their investors and offset about 20% of our electric use. This is our big Hail Mary idea for heating the campus. So electricity is one thing, and this is to go deep into the earth, and I have another slide on this. So I'll just approach these two future electric with the next slide. Oh, and there's peaking biomass for heating also. So solar, we use other people's money. We're going to third parties to build right off campus. This is our first 2 megawatt. It's about a 10-acre solar site. It's kind of funky looking because that's a wetland in the middle of it. And we provide long-term power purchase agreements so the investors have surety of their investment return. Typically, right now we're working on 4 more of these if we can get interconnections agreement with our local utilities. And we're also, as I mentioned, working on a wind farm agreement, or we've signed a wind farm agreement, and hopefully it'll get built. This is back to deep earth heat, earth source heat. This is an idea championed by Professor Jeff Tester, who came to us from MIT. He actually started working on this, I think, in the late 70s in Los Alamos. In our case, the concept is we would drill down almost 3 miles to where the earth is hot enough to provide the heat, pump water down because it's dry. This is not the conventional hydrothermal geothermal system. It's dry, hot rock, so we would have to pump water down through fractures to heat it up and then bring it back to a heat exchanger. So right now, this is a concept. We're talking to our New York State and about raising money just to do a feasibility study. But this would be key to, this is our plan A for heating the campus in the future. It's kind of a long shot. It may not work technically, it may not work economically, and it may not be acceptable to the community. So it's all quite interesting challenges we'd like to approach. So my second to last slide is a case study. I just want to throw in something about adaptation. This is Roosevelt Island in the East River, just on the east side of Manhattan. We're looking kind of east towards Queens. This is our architectural rendering of a campus that we hope is built like this by 2017. We've demolished the hospital. So we won a contest, many of you may be aware of it, that Bloomberg sponsored, to build a tech campus to sort of diversify the economy of New York City. What you see here is all solar panels, and the idea is to make this first academic building net zero energy, where all the electricity, it's an electric building, so the heat would come from ground source heat pumps, and all the electricity would come from, on an annual basis net from the solar panels. We had one set of plans that were actually changed a little bit when Hurricane Sandy came. Hurricane Sandy, the floodwaters came over the seawall, over the sidewalk, over the road, and up on the lawns, like right about here. And so we raised the bottom floor of these buildings about 2 feet because of that. So we had always been cognizant that the projections are for a 6-foot sea level rise this century, but that brought it home a little bit. And we also brought all our transformers above ground So they're in a central utility plant, high and dry, we hope, for the long haul. I just want to put in a plug for the Finger Lakes Climate Fund. So I did offset my now canceled airplane flight to from Syracuse to Boston with our local climate fund. I calculated that I would have used 300 and some pounds, so it cost, or spewed out 300 and some pounds of CO2, and it cost about $3.80 to offset that. So that's what I had. I'll turn it back to Ann.
I'll take the privilege maybe to start a few questions, but I hope there are some out there as well. Natalie, one thing that came to my mind when you were speaking was your focus on the projections of the future and planning for those big events. Coming from my background and knowing what goes into those scenarios, and indeed how uncertain they are, and indeed they may be below what could really happen. We may not have enough knowledge of our own surroundings to know how bad things could be. So do you build in a safety factor? Do you take account for the uncertainty in how wide you have to plan for?
Yes, I mean, the whole discussion about Earth's uncertainties was very key to our process. So there are the uncertainties of climate change. You know, are we under-predicting or over-predicting? So probably under-predicting. There are also the uncertainties of the model we use, which we did downscaling. So because you have climate projection worldwide, and then what does it mean locally? So this is where we work with Catherine Aho, who's a scientist, a climate scientist, and we add a level of uncertainties there because of limited existing weather station data. So you know, this is one aspect. There was also somewhat of a clash, a very interesting one, between science and engineering, in the sense that science is very comfortable working with wide range, and so the approach was there's going to be extreme flooding, and if it's happened in the next 20 years or in the next 70 years, it doesn't matter, it's going to happen. From an engineering point of view or from a building point of view, it's huge. I mean, 20 years versus 70 years, you know, it's what are going to be your design standard. So what we have been doing is we add first our climate projection with uncertainties, then we met with Boston Water and Sewer, state agencies, City of Boston, City of Cambridge, and we compared our different model, and we came with what we thought, we worked to align our design storm in some ways, and so we understand the level of uncertainties, and we know the trend's going to be increasing. It's how much, how soon. So, but this is a first step, and this are very dynamic in the sense that they're going to be reassessed on with each study. But at some point for the City of Cambridge, that's the next step, and this is daunting to them, which one to opt for. So that's a bit of a long answer, but...
No, I think that is really the struggle for the city planners. They need an absolute answer, and they need it for their time frame of the decisions they need to make, and the scientists in general are pretty poor at being able to supply that information on their terms. It's a constant struggle.
Yes, and one thing we are looking at, what's very helpful is looking at critical asset. So we did a study of Massport, and we're doing partners as well, but this is where you say, okay, what are the risks and consequences? So for example, if you have some commercial building, the risk of that building failing is pretty mundane, or you know, or if that building have a life expectancy of 30 years, what should be your design standard? If you're the local hospital that is to be the critical center for a response, then maybe you have zero tolerance for risk there. So this is where also the building use can help you take an informed decision. Your financial horizon also is quite important. Or we look at, for example, for a research center, if you lose 20 years of research and what happened to New York hospital, there's no room for tolerance there. So this is where the criticality of some aspect can allow you to prioritize funds, and prioritize a key decision, and use time also to help you see where you have more time also of your building, so this is where you have to put all those different parameters and help you take a decision path.
This is where that hazards field really helped contribute to the climate change field in the past several years. When we were looking, say, in the Indus Basin and Colorado River basins on scenario-driven climate impact assessment, you start out with your GCMs and your downscale models, and then your hydrology and sediment transport, and then an ecosystem. And by the time you got to any kind of policy question, the uncertainties had piled up so high that there was little warrant for action. But when you take the approach just mentioned of starting with what are some of the critical questions being faced today anyway, and backing into the types of climate analysis that can complement the approach that you might have otherwise taken, that's proven enormously motivating to everyone to be able to kind of incorporate climate impact assessment in their work.
I was very happy, of course, to hear Tony say the money is available. We can do the deferred maintenance because we have the funds. We just need to make the decision on how to apply them. And I linked that in with something you said of how about focusing on the outdoor, the green space? And I noticed Kendall Square, the plans for that have a lot of green, which it was nice to see, of course. But I wonder, do you think there's a way we can instigate the priority, as you suggested, to make it in the planning process to institutionalize basically the design principles of caring about the very long term, caring about the psycho-resilience, I mean, the different aspects that maybe aren't on the table in people's minds quite as much in the past?
I actually think that is happening. It's been great to see what some of the Killian Court studies that are happening now, a real kind of terrestrial ecology approach coming in for planting design, as well as in Kendall Square East Campus, where some of the ways in which the landscape and landscape architectural consultants are being brought in a very kind of prominent way. There have been many landscape architects in the past, but you really get a sense of a movement towards environmental sustainability as a core principle and an inspiring aspect vis-a-vis constraint on design and campus, so that have the sense that in this current planning and building cycle that this is going to be happening in really important ways that haven't been, I think it's fair to say, part of the history of campus development up till now. So this is really new territory, and if it can be linked with the types of research and teaching that we do, where people who do hydrogeology are tracking flow rates and groundwater levels and the sorts of contamination that we have. I mean, I like to think that we have an optimally contaminated campus in the sense that it's got contamination from all the old industries, but not so much so that we'd want to evacuate. I mean, you actually can measure things, you can remediate things, you can have all kinds of instrumentation of what's happening in this landfill and how it's weathered over the past century. There are all kinds of cool scientific questions related to environmental remediation that could be part of our laboratory here at MIT. And so I get the sense that both great things are happening, but even an order of magnitude more is possible.
Because the other angle I wanted to get at a bit was a comment you made about not wanting to adapt, but to have planned to not need adaptation. But how can you foresee what's coming and not and take off the need to adapt?
Yeah, I actually think adaptation is a misnomer. I mean, it's if you ask do human beings adapt by intention, I don't think that's quite sound conceptually, because adaptation is an ex post judgment. People proved adaptive or they didn't. What people do is what a mentor that I had, Gilbert White, he used to speak of human adjustment to changing environmental conditions and hazards. And adjustment is something where you act with the hope of being adaptive, but you won't find out until later. So adjustment then opens up a real sense of creative possibilities, that the adaptive solution is not necessarily singular but wide open, and it has to be assessed and reassessed continuously through the ex post evaluation of things that we've already done. And so adaptation, one tries to mitigate, that is to act in advance and not require adjustments to the actual experience of a disaster or hazard, but that's not possible either. One has to be prepared, and one has to be prepared to adjust in all kinds of ways and possibilities, and even to things that you don't want to think about, with the hope that they'll prove adaptive over the long run.
Interesting twist on the lexicon there.
Yeah. No, climate change colleagues aren't happy with that idea.
No, that's fine.
So,
you also use mitigation in a different form than the standard used in the climate science world.
That's correct.
So,
yeah, in the hazards field, it's different.
So,
yeah.
Maybe I'll put in a plug for a communications event we're planning for the Climate Change Conversation Committee is putting on an event on March 31st about why is it so difficult to talk about climate change and communicate the threat and the issues surrounding it. And we've given a couple examples right here on we use the same words to mean different things in different fields.
And the example that was given on risk and hazard is risk equals hazard times vulnerability. The hazards people say hazard equal risk times vulnerability. In the engineering field, the same kind of dual usage of these terms. But they're easy to sort out if you're in the field.
So I don't want to forget about you, Bert. I was interested in a comment you made about carbon neutrality and how would you get there from here. In this morning's session, which I don't think you were listening in on, but one theme that came up a few times was collective lack of imagination of how are we going to get there and what will the future look like. It seems that Cornell has put a lot of thought into trying many different potential ways to get to that carbon neutrality. It's commendable, and I don't see, I'm no expert in this field, but I don't see that MIT has quite as many options on the table. Perhaps we don't have a lot of 10-acre fields nearby where we can put a lot of solar panels on. But it's interesting. Can you say a bit about where these ideas have come from for your group? Is it a collective effort? Is it from top down? Is it the students who started the movement at the beginning? I mean, how did these ideas surface?
I talked about the Occupy Day Hall. That was 2001. In 2007, when the President's Climate Commitment was offered up by Second Nature, the students, I think there's about 4,000 signatures on a petition to commit. We in the staff wrote staff and faculty collaborated because the president and the provost want to know, well, does this make any sense? And if I can think back to the white paper, it was more like we said, well, we don't know how we're going to exactly get to climate neutrality. We think you should commit, and we'll figure it out as we go, because that's what society has to do. So as he signed the President's Climate Commitment, and we wrote our first climate action plan and filed it, I think, in 2009, we actually opened it up. We had an idea, generation meetings. We had open houses. We kept logs on the computer of all the ideas. So it was, there was quite a wide net cast for ideas on how to proceed towards climate neutrality, and resulted in our first climate action plan in 2009. Our updates since then, we've updated every other year, and we're actually updating it this year, are a little more perfunctory and sometimes not as inclusive. But I think this time, because of the acceleration, we're going to be more inclusive and less engineering. I just would want to stress that I think it's just the challenge is enormous to get off fossil fuels and cheap fossil fuels now because of natural gas is so cheap. The challenge to change the infrastructure over is enormous, and it really it can't just be left us in facilities or engineers to do. We're really hoping the academics step up, and they are actually. We're involving our faculty, and a number are quite engaged.
Any thoughts or comments you want to raise? Way in the back, sure.
Hi, first of all, thank you, all of you, for those insightful comments. I sort of have a follow-up question, Jeremy Poindexter here, related to what was just discussed, which is in sort of my discussions with some of the people in this room and my advisor and my fellow students, and discussing how MIT can implement solutions in sustainability. A common theme that has come up is, well, how can we do this not only, copying or being inspired by things that other people have done, but implement them in a way that is unique to MIT. This idea of applying things in the MIT way really has grabbed, I think people latch onto. And so, I guess that's sort of just a general comment, and maybe people can think about that for brainstorming for this section. But I'd like to throw that out to the panel, who has a variety of different backgrounds and perspectives, both inside and outside of MIT. Can you think of any ways that we could do things like those that have been discussed in a way that's unique to this institute?
That's a great question, and one of the questions that's very much central in the Kendall Square development is, what's the MIT-ness of this space, and what it will make it part of the culture of MIT as a campus design and a place of continuous experimentation and learning. So I think that's squarely on topic with what you've mentioned. I've taken those somewhat of the complete opposite approach in classes as well. And part of what we did when we were looking at the Kendall Square was to say, what lessons can you learn from other parts of the world that might be relevant here? Because in much of the 20th century, the US saw itself as an exporter of knowledge, purely as an exporter. In the 19th century, we were importing and adapting knowledge. And in the 21st century, I think there's going to be all kinds of flows, very different from the 20th century mentality. You make it here and you export it, or you commercialize it elsewhere. And so it was really exciting to see people taking ideas from India on rainwater harvesting that were profound, not just functional, but really profound in how they fit the cultures there, and asked, what would that be like here? And we asked students to think, where's the Walden at MIT? I mean, the kind of counterpoint to an MIT culture. So you get to actually challenge the MIT-ness and the kind of perceived cultures of MIT, as well as to advance them. So just a response to your idea, Jeremy, I think it's a really good question.
I have a very selfish concern about what MIT is about and what would be interested is in our research for the city of Cambridge and other cities, there's that what I call the fourth dimension, which is the virtual dimension, and this is about data. One of the uncertainties is about the lack of data for temperature, for example, or even, and we've been following what MIT is doing, and even there was, there's someone from the CoLab, which is about that virtual room for discussing. And there's some research done about networking. When Sandy happened, what was a key factor was how people connect via their telephone, and there's app, basically. And this is something where MIT is really at the forefront and always has been. And this is data-driven. I mean, sustainability and climate change. And there's the collective, very democratization of data as well. And so this is something that would be so helpful to inform some of our work, and I don't know if academia has been contributing, but there could be something unique here.
Yeah, I think it's happening on campus in the energy field with all this kind of data analytics on the energy, and to push it into the water sphere would be a natural extension, and to be having you could have plasma flow readings of who's using how much water all over the campus and be able to manage it much more effectively real time, near real time. There's all kinds of cool ways in which that idea could really push forward.
I think broadening it just a bit to realize that Cambridge itself is fairly unique as a cultural center. And the thought also that part of why MIT should, my opinion, should take a step forward in this realm is to show how it can be done. And so if you focus too much on the uniqueness of a solution that MIT can make happen, maybe it's not as generalizable. So just a word of caution to be too concerned about doing it in a way only MIT could do.
Sitting in upstate New York, I'm continually amazed by the MIT research and the reports MIT puts out that are comprehensive, thorough, not just a journal paper, but these reports on issues around climate change, climate modeling, energy. The resources there are fantastic, and I just want to see that continue and hope even more so. I think certainly climate change, the crisis, is one of the defining, if not the defining issue of this century anyway. And I think it's just great what MIT is doing, and just keep doing and do more of it. So.
Thanks, Bert. Is there another question out there? Comment? Yep, sure.
Thinking about how when we talk about building technologies, we have something to measure against, building code or ASHRAE standards or something that's quantifiable, and that if you improve on that, you can look at the payback and the life cycle and so forth. In the case of open space, natural systems, vegetation, it's a little bit, it's not quite as clear yet about how we measure those things and how we talk about what the quantifiable benefits are beyond the kind of softer elements of the landscape that are an improvement, but they're a little bit harder sell perhaps in terms of, if we're just looking at strictly how is this going to contribute to our climate change, are we saying that X number of trees is a carbon offset to a new building technology? Can you help us think about that issue a little bit?
A couple of concrete examples. You take the East Cambridge has been going through sewer separation past years, and almost to the point of sewer separation where even though we're going to have fewer combined sewer overflows into the Charles River, we're going to have direct loading of all of the stormwater into the river that was formerly, some portion of which went to treatment plants. So that means the loading of all kinds of contaminants, including the phosphorus that's of special concern, is going to come up. And that could be a really very explicit kind of measured criterion of any kind of campus green infrastructure to go in as phosphorus reduction, for which one could get credits. The second great example is insofar as one can reduce the increase infiltration, reduce the stormwater discharge through green infrastructure, it can reduce your building costs for detention in subsurface cisterns and so on. So there's another trade-off that could be part of, and I think it already is part of a lot of analyses of new building projects. You mentioned some of the microclimatic benefits of trees and vegetation, not to be underestimated what tree canopy can do in all kinds of very subtle ways. And I think cultivating a sense of the subtlety of environmental experience again as to what's a really comfortable space and what's uncomfortable will be, it's not been as necessary with air conditioning and other types of interventions, but if that can be cultivated in people, it'd be enormous in terms of psychological benefits. And I don't think we should shy away or treat soft things as soft anymore. The kinds of experiential and psychological and social, if we look at what our community says is most important in the way of resilience, it's these psychological and social dimensions which we don't measure with respect to environmental interventions nearly as rigorously as other types of benefits. So get the types of work in cognitive sciences and psychophysiology to work on this, and we might find just extraordinary benefits that can be quantified by different types of space and design and stress reduction, which all of us would pay a fortune for a little bit of that and not doing necessarily, Bert, more of the same. As we're kind of at a threshold sometimes.
For the city of Cambridge, what we realized looking at projected flooding in terms of depth and boundaries is that it won't be possible to engineer out of the flooding. So it has to be a combination of green infrastructure and standard engineering. And we looked at Hoboken, who was able to get an EPA waiver using a maximization of projected green infrastructure, and that included green roof, green street, combined with their standard, more traditional engineering to show that how much the green infrastructure was contributing to stormwater management. And this is will be a model for the city of Cambridge.
I remember mentioning to colleagues in the Netherlands, we only have, several feet down to groundwater in our campus. We have a very shallow water table. And they said, what are you talking shallow? We work with centimeters, It's storage.
It brings to mind a comment this morning. I was speaking with Israel over coffee about closing down the campus for the snowstorms recently, because this is, in recent memory, this has been a very unusual year, but in the old days, the campus didn't close during snowstorms. And of course, the reason why they did this year is really had nothing to do with MIT, but primarily to do with the T and the governor declaring emergency. So it's the infrastructure that's not within our control that is controlling our productivity, in a sense. An interesting comment that you made that in these days of WebEx, why would we need to close campus? We could all dial in from home and continue classes and operate. Most of us can telecommute and do our jobs from wherever we happen to be. Could that become a priority instituted in our culture here to not need to be present? Just a thought. All right, thank you again for the participants and everybody for